Let me answer your question, Michaela. Confirming a standard due diligence now, depending on market, would be about 1,000. The earnest money would be about 1% as a general standard, depending on the market. Contingency wouldn't impact these. Contingency probably would impact those. But contingency, like I said, if you put in an actual contingency, that's basically where you're trying to get everything back. And most sellers aren't going to agree to it. Now, on the other thing, I told you personally, for me, if the house has been on the market for a while, I don't recommend going over $1,000 in due diligence if you can get it. Start there is what I'm saying. Maybe people want to negotiate up, sure. Just to put it in perspective, I'm always thinking about my buyer's well-being. And so I actually had buyers, you ready for this? Purchase a $1.3 million house. But because it had been on the market for a couple of weeks, I negotiated only $1,000 in due diligence on this $1.3 million house. And the listing agent was so offended. He said, Seth, this is a $1.3 million house, right? I said, yeah, I know. Do you want our offer or not? He said, well, typically we see much higher than that. I said, I know. Do you want our offer or not? So, we had like $10,000 or, $15,000 in earnest money. But I basically was just, shafting the guy because I knew I could, and it worked out, and we ended up buying the house. But, you always got to do what's in the best interest of your client. So just look at, whatever the current situation is. If you can get them less due diligence, do it. It's your obligation. Folks, I've negotiated as low as $150 in due diligence before on contracts, right? I've done some without due diligence. If they need work, if I'm a little iffy about it, I'll go back to them and I say, hey, we like the house, but we're real iffy on what we're going to find. So we'll do earnest money and we'll do, a 1 week due diligence period. And so we'll, basically take a look at the house, have a quick inspection and make sure they're cool. And then, we'll see if we're going to move forward or not. And so it just depends. So I've negotiated no due diligence. I've negotiated 150 in due diligence. You just always got to be thinking about what's best for your client and what's going to protect them the most. What you got, Marshall?
If I was thinking about contingencies, if we're working with a buyer and they are not pre-approved for financing or it's not complete and they want us to put in an offer, don't we have to do it because that's what they want us to do?
Say that one more time so I make sure I'm answering correctly.
Someone who needs financing but they don't have a pre-approval yet. But the buyer wants us to go ahead and put an offer in on a house. We have to do that, right?
Here's the thing. If you've got a buyer agency agreement in place, you do have to follow the lawful, willful instructions of your buyer because of the obedience piece. But at the end of the day, the answer is not really. And here's why. Why would we put in an offer that we didn't know that they could do? Because especially if there's any due diligence, if the seller accepts that offer and the buyer can't go actually buy it, they're still legally obligated to pay due diligence to the seller. So this is where you've got to be stern in your job and you look at them and say, hey, you don't have funding. This seller is not going to accept our offer without a pre-approval unless they're just an absolute idiot. And so we're wasting our time. You need to get your pre-approval together. We need to make sure that you can buy it. Otherwise, you're going to cost yourself money and you're going to miss out on this house anyway. So that's where you got to be a little firm for them. Do not put in an offer if you don't know that they can buy it. That is absolutely not in anybody's best interest. That's really, where you've got to lay down the law and say, no, we're not doing that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And if they're a cash buyer, do they just get a letter from their bank?
Yeah, absolutely. If they're a cash buyer, there's two things that would be acceptable for both you as their buyer's agent or for a listing agent. A letter from a financial institution stating that they have sufficient funds to pay off the full balance of the house at closing, or a statement balance. And they can block out account numbers, they can block out transactions, but it needs to show their name and it needs to show their balance. And either is acceptable. Now, here's a recommendation. When you get a letter from a financial institution, Google it to make sure it's a legit person. Find that person's contact information as a financial advisor on the internet and then call them that way. Don't call the number that's on that letter because there are weirdo people that will falsify documents like that and the phone number is their brother. So when you call them and they state that, the brother's like, oh, absolutely. This is Jeeves with Chase National Bank and my client Steve has 6.7 billion. Yeah, don't rely on cuckoo birds. But, if you Google the financial institution, find the name of the person and they're an actual employee, call them and just verify the letter for sure. But either is acceptable.